The wedding photos hit my feed exactly 7 days after the judge signed our divorce papers. There he was, my ex-husband, radiant, holding the waist of the woman he called his absolute soulmate. The caption read, "Finally found my forever." Everyone in our mutual circle texted me, offering pity, assuming I was crying into a tub of ice cream over how fast he had replaced me. They thought I was heartbroken. But the truth? As I zoomed in on his new bride's flawless, smiling face, the air left my lungs for a completely different reason. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold, terrifying shiver ran down my spine. I knew that face. I knew it from a dark, hidden corner of my past that I had spent years trying to forget. He thought he was pulling off the ultimate rebound to hurt me, but he had no idea that the dream woman he just legally tied himself to was a phantom from a history that was about to blow his entire life to pieces. Let me back up for a second. My name is Arden. I'm 28 years old and I work as a graphic designer, a job that requires me to have a sharp eye for visual details, faces, and patterns. For the last 3 years, my life had been completely consumed by Julian's shifting moods and the agonizing, slow collapse of our marriage. When the paperwork was finally finalized a week ago, I thought the chapter was closed. I thought the worst was behind me. But looking at that screen, everything changed. I knew that face. I didn't just recognize her from a passing glance or a random social media profile. I knew her from a very specific, dark, and deeply hidden corner of my past. A piece of my history that I had spent years trying to bury and forget. Julian thought he was pulling off the ultimate power move. He believed that by rushing down the aisle just a week after our split, he was delivering a final crushing blow to my self-esteem. He wanted the world to think he had upgraded to a dream woman, who outshone me in every possible way. What he had absolutely no idea about, however, was that the elegant, mysterious woman he had just legally tied his life to was actually a phantom. She was someone tied to a secret that had the potential to blow his entire existence into absolute pieces. As I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the initial shock transformed into something hard and focused. Julian wanted a reaction out of me, but he was about to get a reality check he never saw coming. To understand how I ended up staring at that wedding photo in absolute shock, you have to understand the anatomy of my broken marriage. Julian and I were together for 3 years, but looking back I can see that the man I married vanished somewhere around the 18-month mark. It started subtly. Julian was a corporate consultant, climbing a ladder that seemed to demand more and more of his humanity with every rung. Slowly, the warmth that had originally drawn me to him was replaced by a sharp, calculating coldness. He began to look at our life not as a partnership, but as a business portfolio, and somewhere along the line he decided I was a bad investment. The gaslighting became a daily routine. If I expressed loneliness because he was working 80-hour weeks, he told me I was being overly dependent. If I tried to talk about our future, he claimed I lacked ambition and was holding him back from reaching his true potential. He made me feel incredibly small, questioning my own memory and my value as a graphic designer. Then came the sudden, aggressive demand for a divorce. He didn't want to go to counseling, he didn't want to talk it through. He just wanted a clean break, completely out of the blue, insisting that we sign the paperwork as fast as humanly possible. He stripped me of my confidence, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my shattered self-esteem while he moved on without a backward glance. I thought his rush to end our marriage was just driven by his cruel desire to discard me and start fresh. I thought he simply wanted to erase our history because I no longer fit into the grand, successful image he wanted to project to the world. But looking at the wedding announcement on my phone, the puzzle pieces finally started to align in a terrifying new way. His impatience hadn't been about escaping our past at all. It was about rushing toward a carefully calculated future with a woman he barely knew, completely unaware of who she really was. I stared at the photo of Elena, his new bride, as the initial numbness faded into absolute certainty. Her hair was styled differently now, a sleek, dark bob instead of the long, cascading waves she wore back then, and her makeup was sophisticated, perfectly matching the high society aesthetic Julian always craved. But you can't disguise the structure of a jawline, the distinct curve of a brow, or the intense, hyper-focused look in someone's eyes. My graphic design training had trained me to notice minuscule details that most people completely overlook, and there was no doubt about it. This wasn't just a random beautiful woman Julian had met at a high-end lounge or through work. I knew this woman. The realization hit me like a physical blow, sending my mind racing back 3 years to a prestigious corporate networking gala. Julian had dragged me along to impress his firm's executives, and the entire night had been a blur of expensive suits, forced laughter, and shallow conversations. But she had stood out. Back then she wasn't operating under the name Elena, and she certainly wasn't presenting herself as the wealthy, independent real estate mogul Julian was currently bragging about online. Back then she had gone by an entirely different name, carrying herself with an icy, calculating precision that felt completely out of place among the regular corporate crowd. Seeing her face next to my ex-husband's in a wedding announcement felt like stepping into a twilight zone. Why would a woman from that specific high-stakes environment reappear now, completely rebrand her identity, and marry Julian just 7 days after his divorce was finalized? It defied all logic. Julian prided himself on being the ultimate chess player in his professional and personal life, always believing he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. But looking at Elena's perfectly composed smile in that photograph, I realized he wasn't the player at all. He was a pawn who had just willingly walked right into a beautifully designed trap. As I sat there staring at the screen, the memories of that corporate gala came flooding back, unlocking a forgotten warning from the shadows of my mind. It happened late in the evening, away from the glittering ballroom and the clinking champagne glasses. I had escaped to the quiet, marble-lined restroom to catch my breath and slip away from Julian's critical eye for just a few moments. That was when she walked in. Back then, her presence was commanding, almost predatory, completely contrasting the soft, supportive wife persona she was projecting in the wedding photos today. She had paused in front of the mirror, adjusting her lipstick with absolute precision, before her eyes locked onto mine through the glass reflection. She didn't know my name, but she knew exactly who I was with. Without turning around, her voice dropped to a sharp, icy whisper that cut right through the silence of the room. She told me to watch my back, warning me that the people Julian was trying so desperately to impress were operating in a dangerous league, and that loyalty in his world was nothing more than a disposable commodity. At the time, I had dismissed her words as the bitter ramblings of a cynical corporate climber, or perhaps just a strange psychological game meant to rattle a competitor's wife. I never told Julian about the encounter, mostly because I feared he would accuse me of being dramatic or paranoid. But now, 3 years later, those exact words echoed in my ears with terrifying clarity. She had known back then what kind of world Julian was entangled in. Remembering the sheer intensity of that bathroom warning made me realize that her sudden reappearance in Julian's life wasn't an accident or a stroke of romantic luck. It was a calculated re-entry, and the countdown on Julian's carefully constructed world had officially begun. Instead of allowing myself to sink into despair or let the humiliation consume me, the graphic designer in me took over and I turned into a detective. I pulled my old laptop out from the back of the closet, the one I used during the early years of my marriage before Julian forced me to upgrade to a system he could easily monitor. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I began digging up the past, searching through archived design files, old event guest lists, and backup folders from that corporate gala 3 years ago. I needed to find her original name, the digital footprint she had left behind before she completely erased herself to become Elena. What I discovered next sent a literal chill through my veins. As I cross-referenced her face using advanced image searches and old professional directories, I realized that her current online presence was a complete illusion. The real estate website showcasing her multi-million-dollar listings, her glowing LinkedIn profile, and her active social media accounts had all been created within the last 8 months. It was a perfectly fabricated digital ghost. The woman Julian thought he had met organically had actually constructed a flawless, synthetic identity from scratch, designed specifically to appeal to a status-obsessed man like him. She had planted herself in his path, knowing exactly which buttons to press to make him view her as the ultimate dream woman. But why go through all that trouble for a mid-level corporate consultant? As I stared at the screen, comparing the fake real estate mogul to the mysterious corporate shadow from 3 years ago, I realized this ran much deeper than a simple rebound romance. Julian thought he was controlling the narrative of his life, but he was completely blind to the fact that his entire reality was being engineered by someone else. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the only one who saw the storm coming. To uncover the truth behind this engineered illusion, I knew I needed insider information, which meant reaching out to the one person who still kept tabs on Julian's professional circle. I pulled up my contacts and found Marcus, an old colleague of Julian's who had always been a bit of a gossip, though he masked it behind corporate politeness. I dialed his number, my heart hammering against my ribs, forcing my voice to sound light, casual, and completely unaffected by the recent divorce. When he answered, I played the part of the mature, well-wishing ex-wife perfectly, claiming that I had seen the sudden wedding photos online and wanted to send the new couple a tasteful registry gift to show there were no hard feelings. Marcus took the bait immediately, eager to spill the details of what he clearly viewed as the office drama of the century. He told me that Julian and Elena had allegedly met at an exclusive, private art gallery opening in the city just 4 months ago. According to Julian's glowing accounts to his co-workers, it had been a whirlwind fairy tale romance, a mutual spark of brilliant minds recognizing each other instantly. Marcus described how Julian had bragged about how effortlessly Elena fit into his high-stakes lifestyle, how her sharp business acumen complemented his own, and how they quickly realized they couldn't bear to live apart. Listening to Marcus recount the story, the sheer audacity of the fabrication made my stomach turn. The story they were telling everyone was a complete, beautifully choreographed lie. There was no organic art gallery meeting, no accidental spark of true love. The timeline proved she had been tracking him long before our divorce was even finalized, waiting for the exact moment our marriage legally ended to step onto the stage and claim her prize. Julian was completely intoxicated by the fantasy of having won the ultimate trophy wife, entirely oblivious to the fact that his perfect fairy tale had been scripted word for word by the very woman sitting across from him at the dinner table. Armed with the knowledge that Elena's entire identity was an elaborate fiction, I decided it was time to step out of the shadows and orchestrate a little accidental meeting of my own. According to the corporate gossip Marcus had shared, Elena frequently spent her Tuesday mornings working from a highly exclusive, upscale cafe located just a couple of blocks away from the financial district. I dressed meticulously, choosing an outfit that projected quiet confidence, and walked into the bustling coffee shop with a clear purpose. It didn't take long to spot her. She was seated at a corner table, bathed in the soft morning light, reviewing documents on a sleek tablet with that same icy precision I remembered from years ago. I ordered my drink, took a deep breath, and walked directly toward her table, pretending to look for a place to sit in the crowded room. As I neared her, I intentionally let my gaze linger until our eyes met, allowing a sudden look of carefully acted surprise to wash over my face. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady and polite, "but aren't you Elena? I saw the wedding photos. I'm Arden, Julian's ex-wife." The air between us instantly turned to glass, and for a fraction of a second the polished, smiling mask of the dream bride slipped entirely. In that fleeting moment, I watched her eyes widen slightly as a sharp flash of absolute recognition crossed her face. She realized in an instant that I didn't just see her as the new woman on Julian's arm. I saw right through the digital ghost she had created. Instead of panicking, however, her expression shifted into a cold, amused calm that sent a shiver down my spine. The psychological chess match had officially begun right there over lukewarm lattes, and as she slowly closed her tablet, I knew there was no turning back from the storm we were both about to unleash. Elena slowly set her coffee cup down, her movements entirely devoid of the warmth she had displayed in those wedding photos. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative murmur that instantly cut through the ambient chatter of the cafe. "Sit down, Arden," she said, discarding the cheerful persona completely. "We need to talk, but not here. Walk with me." I followed her out into the crisp morning air, turning down a quiet tree-lined side street where the corporate crowds thinned out. The moment we were isolated, the grand illusion shattered entirely. She turned to face me, her eyes sharp and completely clinical. She admitted without hesitation that she wasn't in love with Julian, nor was she a real estate mogul. Elena was an independent corporate investigator, hired by a silent consortium of investors to track a massive, highly sophisticated embezzlement scheme that had been bleeding Julian's firm dry for the past 18 months. She had been monitoring the digital breadcrumbs for nearly a year, and every single trail of stolen funds led directly to my ex-husband's private accounts. Hearing her speak the truth out loud made the pieces of my broken marriage instantly lock into place. Julian hadn't demanded a divorce because he fell out of love with me or because I lacked ambition. He had done it because his walls were closing in, and he needed to secure his assets before the hammer dropped. Elena had positioned herself as his perfect fantasy to get close enough to witness his financial maneuvers firsthand. I stood there, the cool wind hitting my face, realizing that the man who had spent years making me feel completely worthless was actually a criminal on the verge of total ruin, completely blind to the fact that his new bride was his judge and jury. Elena leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper as she exposed the true depth of Julian's desperation. She explained that his sudden, frantic rush to push our divorce through and marry her just 7 days later wasn't driven by romance at all. It was a calculated legal maneuver. Under our state's current legal statutes, a legally wedded spouse cannot be compelled to testify against their partner in a court of law regarding financial crimes. Julian knew the corporate walls were closing in on him, and he mistakenly believed that by marrying a wealthy, influential woman like Elena, he was creating the ultimate bulletproof shield against the impending investigation. He thought he was being incredibly clever, manipulating a beautiful woman into a quick marriage to protect his stolen millions, entirely unaware that he had actually invited the lead investigator straight into his home. By giving her unfettered access to his private life, his shared computers, and his daily schedule, he had handed her the exact keys required to unlock his downfall. Julian believed he had married a shield, completely blind to the fact that he had actually married the ultimate trap. Elena looked at me, her eyes flashing with a cold determination, and asked if I wanted to help her pull the trigger on his downfall. The proposition hung heavily in the air between us, and I felt a profound internal conflict raging inside me. My initial instinct, honed by months of painful gaslighting and emotional exhaustion, screamed at me to just turn around, walk away, and protect the fragile peace I had finally started to rebuild for myself. I was legally free from Julian, and I didn't owe his corporate world anything. But as I looked at Elena, a deeper, hotter flame of justice ignited within my chest, burning away the last remnants of the insecurity Julian had spent years instilling in me. He had stripped me of my self-esteem, convinced everyone we knew that I was the problem, and quietly drained our shared marital savings to fund his illicit activities before discarding me like trash. If I walked away now, he might actually succeed in using this sham marriage to evade accountability, leaving me to carry the emotional scars of a thief's deception. Elena needed someone who knew his intimate habits, his old passwords, and the specific names of the offshore shell companies he used to mention in his sleep. I took a deep breath, looked her dead in the eye, and made my definitive choice. I was going to help her take him down. The opportunity to execute our plan arrived sooner than expected, wrapped in the glittering packaging of a high-profile industry gala. Julian's firm was celebrating its annual milestone, and because he had recently orchestrated what looked like a massive financial coup, he was being treated as the guest of honor. Thanks to Elena's connections within the executive circle, my name was quietly added to the exclusive guest list, ensuring I would have front-row seats to the final act of his carefully constructed deception. I spent hours preparing, selecting a striking emerald gown that radiated absolute confidence, a stark contrast to the muted, submissive tones Julian used to force me to wear when we were together. Walking into the grand ballroom was like stepping into a den of polished wolves. The room was a sea of expensive tuxedos, dripping diamonds, and clinking crystal glasses, with Julian standing right at the center of the room, soaking in the adulation like a man who believed he owned the world. Elena stood by his side, playing the part of the doting, elegant new bride to absolute perfection, her adoring smile masking the cold, calculating investigator who was currently orchestrating his complete ruin. As I stepped onto the marble floor, I caught Julian's eye across the crowded room, watching the smug satisfaction freeze on his face. He had no idea that the ex-wife he thought he had successfully broken was about to dismantle his entire life. Julian spotted me gliding across the floor, and the smug expression returned to his face, sharper than ever. He excused himself from a group of senior partners and walked directly toward me, pulling a beautifully composed Elena along by the hand. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to show everyone in the room exactly how much he had upgraded since discarding me. "Arden," he said, his voice dripping with an offensive mixture of pity and arrogance that made my skin crawl. "I have to admit I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this kind of high society crowd was really your scene anymore." He leaned in closer, ensuring his patronizing tone carried to the nearby executives, gesturing grandly to Elena. "I suppose you've seen the news. This is Elena, my wife. A true partner who actually understands the demands of my world and matches my ambition." Elena played her role flawlessly, offering me a polite, empty smile that perfectly mirrored the supportive spouse persona he expected. Instead of showing anger, I let my shoulders drop slightly and force a look of quiet defeat onto my face. I played the meek, broken ex-wife to perfection, sighing softly and nodding as if his words had cut me to the quick. "I'm happy for you, Julian," I murmured, keeping my voice small and trembling just enough to feed his massive ego. It worked beautifully. Watching me appear so entirely crushed caused Julian to let his guard down completely, his chest swelling with the absolute certainty that he had won. He laughed, turned on his heel and walked away to prepare for his big keynote speech, completely overconfident and entirely oblivious. He believed he had delivered the ultimate humiliation to the woman he left behind, completely unaware that my submissive act had just successfully locked him into the center of our trap. While Julian was standing on the grand stage, completely absorbed in delivering his boastful keynote speech to a room full of applauding executives, the real work began in the shadows. Elena had subtly excused herself from the front table just moments before the lights dimmed, slipping away into the quiet, dimly lit corridor that led toward the private executive suites. Thanks to the intimate knowledge of Julian's daily habits and digital routines that I had shared with her, we knew exactly how he operated when he felt secure. He always left his primary corporate phone and his personal encrypted tablet locked inside his briefcase in the secure holding room during major public presentations, believing the venue's private network was entirely impenetrable. Moving with the quick, silent precision of a seasoned professional, Elena utilized the master key card she had quietly cloned earlier in the evening to slip into the locked room unnoticed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood near the ballroom exit, acting as her eyes and ears, watching the stage to ensure Julian remained thoroughly distracted by his own voice. Inside the dark room, Elena opened his briefcase using the specific backup combination I remembered him setting years ago, a date he thought I had completely forgotten. She quickly plugged a compact high-speed encryption drive directly into his primary device, initiating a silent data mirror. Within 90 seconds, the hidden drive bypassed his security protocols, transferring the final missing pieces of the puzzle directly to a secure external server. It captured the exact routing numbers, the shell company signatures, and the encrypted transaction logs detailing the millions he had stolen from his investors. Julian continued his passionate speech about corporate integrity, entirely unaware that the digital ghost he had welcomed into his life had just stripped away his protection. Elena slipped back into the ballroom just as the applause erupted, giving me a microscopic nod. The modern heist was complete, the trap was fully sprung, and Julian's empire was officially reduced to nothing more than a countdown. The keynote ended, the applause faded, and Julian stepped off the stage, practically glowing with the thrill of his own success. He immediately looked for Elena, wrapping his arm tightly around her waist as a few remaining partners offered their final congratulations. I watched from the edge of the foyer as he began heading toward the main exit, his face full of arrogant satisfaction, ready to leave the venue and celebrate what he believed was the greatest night of his life. But as he reached the heavy glass doors of the lobby, 3 sharply dressed individuals in dark suits stepped out from the shadows, effectively blocking his path. The lead investigator stepped forward, pulling a federal badge from his jacket pocket and holding it up in the dim light. The music from the ballroom was still faintly playing in the background as the agent clearly stated Julian's full name and informed him that they had a warrant for his immediate arrest on charges of grand larceny, wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The transformation on Julian's face was instantaneous. The arrogant, smug smile completely evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickly pale mask of absolute horror as the reality of the situation hit him. He staggered back a step, his eyes darting frantically around the lobby before locking onto his new bride. "Elena, call Martin," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation as he grabbed her arm. "Tell them there's been a mistake. Show them who you are." Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly reached into her evening bag, pulled out Julian's backup hard drive along with a decrypted digital ledger, and handed them directly to the waiting federal agents. She looked at him with those cold, clinical eyes, completely discarding the adoring wife persona for the last time. Julian stared at her, his jaw dropping in utter shock as he finally realized that his dream woman was the very architect of his absolute ruin. The echoes of that chaotic night eventually faded, leaving behind a profound, beautiful silence. 3 months later, the legal dust had completely settled. The assets Julian had tried so desperately to hide and protect were frozen by the courts, scheduled to be returned to the investors he had defrauded, alongside a substantial portion of our original savings that was legally restored to me as restitution. Julian was facing a lengthy prison sentence, stripped of the status and power he had traded his humanity to achieve. He had built his entire life on a foundation of deception, entirely unaware that the truth would eventually catch up to him. Meanwhile, I stood on the shore of a quiet beach in Carmel, the cool ocean breeze brushing against my skin as I looked out at the endless horizon. The heavy burden of the past 3 years had completely vanished, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of freedom. I had finally reclaimed my name, my career, and my self-worth, proving to myself that I was far stronger than the broken woman Julian had tried to make me believe I was. The fake fairy tale he had engineered for himself had ultimately become the very key to my liberation. Now, as I watched the waves crash against the sand, completely free to start my life fresh on my own terms, I can't help but wonder about the hidden dynamics in other people's lives. If you found yourself standing in my exact shoes, realizing your ex had married an absolute stranger just 7 days after your divorce, what would you have done? Would you have walked away to protect your peace, or would you have fought for justice? Comment your thoughts below. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end.